you. So, do you support enforcing our city's housing codes via the rental inspection ordinance? If not, how do you propose to ensure that our city's housing codes are followed?
This question's come up a bit about the rental inspection program. And when it was first being discussed, I wasn't for that program, and I'm still not for that program today. I think before we did have a program that involved the two constituencies involved, which was the renter and the landlord. Either one could request an inspection at any time. And yes, there are some issues with some of the housing in town, but instead of going after those people, we decided we'd involve every single landlord and every single renter and inspect every single place and create a city staff and add to the budget that way, and also buy vehicles. Now, the argument is that the landlords will pay for it, but then it comes for the renters. I think we do need to look at the inspection process, make sure that we have housing that is safe and livable. We do have to look at the unintended consequences if we start shutting down a lot of housing and start raising the cost here. We do have a lot of older buildings in town. If we want to look at what some communities do, which is a refurbishing or reconditioning code. I mean, with the expense of housing in Manhattan, we need to look at all that we can do to keep that cost down.
Thank you, Mr. Mata. Thank you, Mr. Mata. Phil Anderson, please.
I'm in favor of mandatory residential property inspection and have been for about 25 years. I've been in the business myself for 30 years and have been a strong advocate for 25. I had a student a number of years ago named Anna Ailey, and she gave a speech entitled, "We Don't Have to Live in Slums." And it was a very good speech. It was a persuasive speech. It was so good that I sent it to my speech editor's attention. And it was included in the next edition and subsequent editions of that book, We Don't Have to Live in Slums, by Anna Ailey. And she's talking about Manhattan, Kansas. And it's quite compelling. So that book is being used all over the country. That's not the kind of image that I want for Manhattan. We finally have residential rental property inspection. So far, it seems to be going smoothly because I check with the people, especially some of my friends who are also in the business, but not necessarily in favor of rental inspection. And I talked to a friend of mine the other day on the street, and I said, well, how did your first inspection go? He said, I hate to admit it, but it wasn't too bad.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Stan Herman.
Well, I was landlord for 40 years in Manhattan, one of the co-founders of the Landlords of Manhattan. I started in 1967 with my first rental property over on Raton. And so when the first rental inspection started, Earl Schauber was the inspector in 1969. And I experienced the rental inspection firsthand from 69 on. But I was just trying to think of the unsafe apartments in Manhattan. Now, there was a fiveplex over there at 1010 Fremont. And there was a college student, and he was cleaning his motorcycle parts with gasoline in the furnace room. So when the water heater came on, the building exploded. He got third-degree burns. He died 2 months later. And then there was a man that was a resident over Westwood Apartments there. He took the battery out of his smoke detector, and he was drinking, smoking in bed, and he died of smoke inhalation. There was a lady over there on Dickens that had one of the condos there, and she was smoking. She was on oxygen, obviously. She pulled the battery out of the smoke detector, so she died. And this rental inspection wouldn't have saved any of those lives. So the unsafe apartments they're talking about, I'm trying to think of others that have seriously injured or died.
Thank you, Mr. Herman. Rich Jankovich.
I was a proponent for the inspections from the beginning, and I think the core of it was because of a lot of older non-conforming homes, especially, rather than the new construction that's been going on over the last 6 or 7 years, because we've had a tremendous amount of change in density around the campus, especially But even on the west side of Manhattan, we have a significant amount of new construction of apartments, especially if you look off of Scenic Drive, both on the east and the west side. We have many, many homes that were converted very simply, sometimes just taking a doorway out and covering it and saying, gee, we have 2 apartments and we make it in. They're on the same utility, on the same furnace. They have some very old plumbing and things that don't meet current code. There's overcrowding, there's many issues that are there. And I think part of the idea was to get those living units up to a reasonable, safe level. And I think the consequence so far has done that. And I've talked to the code people and the inspectors, and they're finding lots of safety issues. And I think in the end we're going to find that we've created a safer environment, and the cost will be greater to the landlords that are really not taking care of the properties for their tenants.
Thank you, Mr. Jankovich. Wynn Butler, same question.
Okay, I think that the city rental inspection system had a good intent behind it, but I've heard a lot of people talk about affordable housing. And what did it do to affordable housing? It's going to raise the cost of rent. That's the bottom line. So that's a bad unintended consequence of the rental inspection program. There's another factor here that deals with safe housing, and that's the renter has a responsibility for where he chooses to live. I'm familiar with the speech that Phil mentioned. That we used it out of Barton College, and students that choose where to live, they choose where to rent. So do soldiers. And I think affordable housing competition, the new buildings that are being built, are going to cause folks to have a choice. Okay, we can live in this house that maybe is not up to code, or we can live in this house. So competition will take care of the problem of older properties that are not well maintained. A landlord that's maintaining bad properties will eventually be out of business in the long run. A lot of it, I think, has to though rest on the actual landlord. And enforcement of existing codes will solve the same purpose without, I think, having the unintended consequences.